In the wake of President Obama's proposed gun control executive orders, we have seen online and on cable news, especially on Fox News, a lot of the very common myths about gun control and what the public does and doesn't want being thrown around. And as we always must, because nobody seems to learn, we're going to have to knock down a few of those myths today. And so it's especially frustrating, by the way, if I could just quickly say, the reaction to what Obama is doing, considering how weak sauce those new regulations are.
He's not even really proposing new
regulations.
regulations. All he wants to do is expand and also strengthen laws and regulations that are already in place. And the fact that the right wing specifically can't handle that, just enforcing laws that we already have in place.
Yeah.
Amazes me. By the way, part of his plan, one of the provisions is, hey, why don't we funnel some more money into mental health services? The same issue that the right wing says that we need to focus on. But apparently, all of a sudden, because of Obama's executive actions, no.
But when they said that, you missed that immediately after they winked at the camera.
Exactly.
Yeah, so let's talk about those the background checks, which is perhaps the strongest of these relatively weak new executive orders. Now, a lot of people on the right have been saying, you libs are lying about how popular these background checks are and how popular expanding them would be. And I thought, if only there was a way to counter that, by perhaps looking at polling data, which we have for you. So if we could bring up this first graphic, the question was, would you support or oppose a law requiring background checks on people buying guns at gun shows or online? Exactly what Obama's proposed changes are supposed to address. Now, from just a couple of weeks ago, support 89%, oppose 9%. And thankfully, they break it down, and you see there that Republicans support it, 87% of them.
No, I love that. So I want to pause right here for a second. For the Republicans who are watching, right-wing pundits talk about gun control and how unpopular gun control is, specifically background checks, those Republican or conservative pundits are not representing you, okay? They're giving you half-truths, they're giving you myths, they're giving you misinformation. And they're doing so precisely because of the same reason why politicians do everything that they do. They're backed, they're sponsored, they're funded by the NRA, weapons manufacturers, so they have an incentive to lie to you and make it seem as though the vast majority of Americans are not in favor of background checks. They are, and it's not like there's only been one poll on this.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I'm sure some of them, after you've been a politician for a number of years and you've given all of these speeches and along the way you've been receiving money from certain industries, a few of them probably start to believe it and probably become cheaper to buy in the future. We've seen people who stake a position and then they get a bit of support for it and then they just become crazy about it. And so that certainly happens. And so I think that with some of the Republicans, that's probably happening as well. I want to jump aside really fast to the terrorist watch list, the ability of people on the terrorist watch list to get guns. Now, we have talked about this. It seems like the easiest thing in the world to patch that. And if you're accidentally put on the terrorist watch list, as has happened in the past, yes, your ability to buy a gun will be temporarily disabled for a few weeks. I think you can probably wait. I don't think I'm being unreasonable by saying that. What do people think about that terrorist watch list gap right now? Let's bring that graphic up. You're going to see, do you support or oppose banning those? Support banning them, 83% to 13%. Oh, look, Republicans support closing that hole, 77 to 20.
Wow.
Why are we having a conversation about this? These things are so insanely popular. I don't know how many policies I could come up with that I could get 77% of even our fans to agree with, let alone people at large.
But there's this huge disconnect, and I'm hoping people are starting to realize it more and more. What you're seeing in the public, with the media and with politicians, all of their opinions on this issue are not representative of Americans and what Americans believe. You have to think about why they're forming the opinions they are, why they're going out of their way to lie to the public about what the public actually wants. It's because they have a profit motive. They do. And it's important to debunk these things and to be very skeptical of the information that people give you. So Laura Ingraham, who I have such disdain for, continues to lie about these polling numbers. They're polls, okay? They're nationally representative samples. What evidence do you have that these are not popular, that background checks are not popular? She has no evidence whatsoever. She's disgusting. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, she's not well liked, and she would be hated by far more if anyone knew who she was.
Why would anyone in the country be against background checks? Guns are meant to kill, okay? If you're going to hit me with one of those stupid expressions about how guns don't kill people, people kill people. Fuck you, you're wrong. Guns are made to kill. What else is a gun for?
Yeah.
So if a gun is made to kill, wouldn't you want to ensure that there are background checks at every level, including at gun shows, to ensure that the wrong people don't get their hands on guns? Why would you be against that? Why would you be against closing the gun show loophole?
As it stands right now, if you are a violent felon in a lot of states, you can buy a gun online. And as long as you're in the same state as the person selling it to you, it doesn't have to be a background check. That's insanity.
We have so much fear-mongering in this country when it comes to terrorists, potential terrorists. Oh my God, don't allow these Syrian refugees into the country. They pose a real risk, a real threat to our country. Okay, well then why would you want to allow someone who's on the terrorist watch list to obtain a gun? If you want to come at me with, oh, probable cause, there's no probable cause that'll get you on that terrorist watch list. Well, there's no probable cause when it comes to the NSA indiscriminately collecting data on us, but they're not upset about that. No one was up in arms about that. When it comes to unreasonable searches and seizures, no one cares about probable cause when it comes to that, right? Our Constitution doesn't mean anything when it comes to that issue. But when it comes to the Second Amendment, oh my God, probable cause. We got to ensure that everyone, even those on the terrorist watch list, has access to guns.
Yeah. Thankfully, the number is actually small. Actually, so I started off by saying people don't learn. But as I'm seeing these numbers, and I pulled the graphics, a lot of people actually have learned, apparently, because of how widely popular these policies are.
Yeah.
And by the way, finally, on the background checks, the same poll just last summer found that 92% of all gun owners support universal background checks at gun shows and online.
Good.
The NRA has lost the gun owners. Only 8% of gun owners, presumably, and I'm assuming that none of them said I don't know or I'm not sure. 8% of gun owners are opposed to this. We are talking to almost no one. And so it's insane that this hasn't already become law. Now, as to whether or not these background checks actually help, because a lot of people are spouting these ideas that they won't stop any mass shootings, they won't stop any crimes, there's no point in expanding them because they don't do anything. And certainly, you can point to particular mass shootings in the past few years that these wouldn't have actually affected. After all, if you just steal a gun from your mom and go shoot someone and she got it legally, background checks wouldn't have actually helped you. Now, there are certainly some in which it might have helped. It might have helped with Charleston. It might have helped with Santa Barbara with certain regulations. But overall, the idea that that background checks don't stop crimes from happening is almost impossible based on the figure that I'm about to show you. More than 2.1 million illegal firearm sales, including 1 million attempted purchases by convicted felons, have been stopped in the 20 years since the enactment of the Brady Handgun Violence Protection Act. 2 million attempts to buy firearms that were stopped thanks to background checks. Now, would all of them have committed crimes? Certainly not. Would some of them? You bet your ass.
Yeah, of course.
So how many lives have been saved? How many people weren't robbed or raped or killed or injured in a terrible way? How many families weren't destroyed? Because thankfully, back 20 years ago, we were at least a little bit reasonable when it came to gun control laws.
Yeah, look, these statistics don't mean anything to those who, again, are profiting off of the sale of these weapons, okay? So it doesn't matter. You can throw as many statistics in their direction. They're not going to change their mind because money trumps all facts. And we're going to continue having this problem. And look, I'm not even against guns. I just want to have, I want regulations in place to ensure that someone can't go to a gun show and obtain as many guns as they want without a background check.
Yeah.
I want to ensure that only the right people are able to legally access guns. Will some people still be able to illegally access guns? Of course, because we're swimming in a sea of guns. But we have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
If you end the conversation by saying, oh, there's too many guns out there already and they're going to access them illegally anyway, so we can't do anything about it, then this will continue to get worse every year. We will continue to have more and more mass shootings on a daily basis, and no one is safe from this, right? It doesn't matter if you live in the wealthiest area in the world, you are at some point going to be a victim of gun violence if we continue on with this lack of regulation.
Yeah. One more figure I'm going to give to you from this poll. Now, this one is unfortunately depressing. The others have been somewhat uplifting. So this question, when it comes to gun control laws, do you think Barack Obama has gone too far, has taken about the right amount of action, or has not gone far enough to change the nation's gun laws? Too far is at 39%. And please bear in mind, that poll is before the executive order announcement.
It's amazing.
Can you name a single thing he had done?
But that's the
to
power,
rein in guns.
That's the power of propaganda. If the
amazing.
mainstream media and these pundits continuously accuse Obama of abusing executive actions and of going too far when it comes to gun laws, all they have to do is keep repeating it, and people will buy it. Yeah. They'll believe it. That's the power of propaganda.
He's going to take all your guns. He's going to take all your guns. You're going to be on a registry. You're going to be disarmed, and then a pack of 6 minorities are going to come into your house and rape your wife. That's what they've been saying for something like 200 years. And so it seems to have gotten into the collective consciousness of, unfortunately, 4 out of 10 Americans. So the 39% who say he's gone too far, that I wish there'd been a follow-up question of, please reference one specific thing he did to advance gun control. Because I follow the news every day, and I want there to be gun control, and I want to give him credit, but I can't come up with anything. I understand that 39%, they have been lied to by insane people who are in the tank for the gun manufacturers and the NRA, and so I sort of understand that. But 20% said about right. Those people apparently weren't affected by the propaganda, but they think, not bad. What did he do? What did he do? We've got thousands of people watching this live right now. Can you name something, please? And I'm not just asking that rhetorically. I don't want to go crazy. Okay. So if you could post a specific thing that he did, I'll read it after I get off the show.
Yeah, the only thing he really did prior to the recent speech he gave on gun control was give the same speech over and over again about how distressed he was. And that was it.
That's going too far, I think.
It's incredible.